we'll give it a couple more seconds here. There's a few people still connecting, but looking forward to the discussion today. We're going to dig in a little bit on some of the options that people are always curious about on college funding. And I guess we've probably waited long enough. We'll go ahead and get started. Good to see everybody again. Thanks for being with us. We are going to dig into a topic today that you may think, if you've already got your kids launched out of the nest, that this no longer applies to you. But then all of a sudden these wonderful grandchildren come along, and all of a sudden we start thinking about, my gosh, I want to maybe think about helping them, and because it's getting to be so expensive. Zach, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Looking forward to going through some of these options. I know that a decade or so, or almost 2 decades ago, it was a topic that, was a big deal in my world, trying to figure out how I was going to pay for stuff.
You got a great story. We won't get into it today, but you basically paid for your own way through school, and I've always respected that about you. And what did you graduate? What year was it? 2010 or 2011?
2010 from.
10, yeah.
I bounced around to a couple colleges and changed my major about 7 times, and so it took me a little longer than the 4 years, but. Yeah.
Well, I know you take some pride, and you should in getting that done for yourself, and that's still an option, by the way, out there, mom and dad and grandpa and grandma. but when we start having kids these days, and we're looking at, my goodness, what it costs to get a 4-year education, Zach, it's a really daunting thing, especially if you've got 3 or 4 kids. My goodness.
Yeah.
In thinking about this discussion today, I thought a good way to start it off was just kind of give people if they're not top of mind on what it's costing these days, just at a couple of colleges in Texas, we have a database. We can pull it up and see pretty accurate information. I had Sydney do a little work on that, and I said, tell me what it's costing starting in 2021 for, let's say, an annual stay at Baylor, for example. And then I also asked her to look up University of Texas. Numbers between UT and A&M are going to be really similar, maybe a little lower at Texas State, but these kind of 2 good examples. Texas State, University of Texas next year, it'll set you back about $26,500 a year. Now the good news is that's kind of all inclusive. That's room and board, books, tuition, all of it. But, that's still, you're looking at easily $100,000 for a 4-year degree. And then at Baylor, typical of private colleges really all over the country, you're looking at closer to just shy of $60,000 a year, about between $58,000 and $59,000 a year. So you're looking at $250,000 to graduate as a Baylor Bear. That's serious money. If you've got 2 or 3 kids, it can be fairly intimidating. Now, of course, some of the things that people do in the real world, we're going to talk about some of the accounts you can use to kind of put money ahead for that type of expense. But very, very few people have saved enough, Zach, as we see, where they've got it all pre-funded in some college fund somewhere. That almost never happens, right? Mm-hmm. And we've had actually guests on before where we've talked about some of the tricks and techniques. I know you got very creative since you were paying your own way, but obviously there's always the old part-time job and work while you're going to school, not getting creative about your roommate situation where you're sharing rent with 4 people instead of just 1 or 2.
Probably eating in a non-advisable way from a doctor's perspective. Yeah, ramen doesn't have too much nutritional value.
No, but when you're young, your body can withstand that kind of stuff, right? So yeah. God made us young for a reason, I guess. But a lot of that happens. And I'll tell you a big area too that parents are very much interested in when they're looking at the costs is doing some of these things at the high school level where they get advanced credits. And, they can also prepare, I think it's called the CLEP test, where they can take that and earn credits. So it's not unusual for motivated kids and parents who've really stayed on top of this to send their child off to a 4-year program and maybe already have a full year or sometimes even more of credits. And that's, you're talking about $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 worth of tuition and room and board you didn't have to spend because you got ahead of the curve. But for most people, they're not doing all of that. And so they're looking at paying these bills in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to dig in today is going to be, well, what are some of the most common ways that we see? And we'll go a little into detail, particularly on 529 plans, and also another strategy that is not as commonly thought of, using Roth IRAs as a possible funding source for this. And I thought, though, before we get into those, let's just get a couple of the ones that we're not big fans of out of the way, but just acknowledge them. Why don't you just kind of give us a quick breakdown on these things called Coverdale IRAs, and just briefly mention why, in our opinion, they're really no longer even worth paying attention to.
Yeah. So the Coverdale was an account option that was given to parents to save. And it had some benefits over 529 in the past. One of them, the primary benefit I would say, is that if you put money in there, you could use that money not just for college, but you could use it for grade school, kindergarten through 12 expenses, like at a private school. So it did offer some benefits, but it had some big cons. One was that there was about a $2,000 a month contribution limit, so much, much lower than other saving options. And it also, you could only save until 18. So, and then there was some legislation a few years ago that allowed parents to use 529s for kindergarten through 12. So that 529s basically have the same benefit that made Coverdale unique. And so there's not very compelling reason to use them anymore. We see them super rarely.
Yeah, we hardly ever see them. You can put more into a 529 plan, and now you've got the same parity basically for being able to use it at the K through 12 private schools. So, So we're not gonna. That's all we're gonna say about those as an option. Now, another one though that we do see more often than not is Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, UTMA. Sometimes they're referred to as UGMA, Uniform Gift to Minors accounts. And again, we'll just touch on them briefly. Those really aren't college accounts. Those are more a way for a parent or a grandparent to give their youngster some money that is going to be theirs to do with whatever they want to do with it once they reach the age of majority, age 21. And so that money doesn't have to be used for college. In fact, if you're going to be using the financial aid form, the federal form FAFSA, actually the UTMA accounts or the UGMA accounts are going to be treated as an asset of the child. And so I'm not an expert on that form. I know you've had some personal experience with it, but I do know that if it's an asset of the child, that hurts them more than it is if it's not considered an asset, maybe just an asset of the parents. So it's not the best tool to use when it comes for transferring money to kids for college. And that's our topic today. Back in the day, it was fairly popular with people who were making a lot of money, and they would want to transfer some assets to their kids and get the benefit of the lower tax bracket for the child on that money as it earned investment income. But even that got kind of closed down with some tax legislation along the way. So it's just not a tool that we put a lot of value on these days, but we do still come across them.
Yeah, those accounts can make sense. Maybe someone has some stocks that it's been passed down or something, and those accounts make sense for that. But not as often for the specific college cost covering purpose.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, if you're going to do that, it might be a negative when it comes to their future eligibility for financial aid on that FAFSA form. All right, Zach, so let's dig in more into the 529 plans, because that's what we get asked about pretty regularly. And most people have heard of them. They have varying levels of understanding of what they are. At a basic level, a 529 plan, the 529 references the IRS, the part of the IRS code, I guess the section where these plans were put into law, if you've ever wondered that. But at a high level, there's, as far as I know, Zach, there's one of these plans pretty much in all 50 states, and they are state-based plans. So each plan is a little different. We're not by any stretch of the imagination saying that we're experts on all those plans, but we have a pretty good fundamental working knowledge of 529 plans in general, particularly the funding limits and how distributions are taxed coming out. that's the primary thing we're interested in. Texas does have a plan from all the websites I've looked at over the years. I know you've looked at them too. It's regarded as one of the good plans. There's always going to be people weighing in on, well, you know, this state's better than this one and whatnot, and that's all fine. That's not the purpose of our discussion today. But what I do want to make sure that we cover real quickly, Zach, is the funding limits. And so the basically at the most basic way to look at it is that you have a gifting limit that you can give another person without triggering what would typically be called gift taxes.
Right.
Those aren't applied until your death, but still, you don't want to exceed those if you can avoid it. And so 529 plan contributions essentially fall under that same limit. And right now, that's $15,000 per child or beneficiary per donor. So a mom and a dad who want to max fund their per year, their single child's 529 plan, they could do $15,000 for each of them. So that'd be $30,000 a year, right?
Right.
Now, if they had 2 kids, you could double that number. If you had 3, you could triple that number. So it's per child and it's per donor. You also can have grandma and grandpa. They also get to do the same thing. So you have the ability, if the family has resources and motive to do this, you have the ability to really put a significant amount of money in these plans. And the magic of returns over the long term would argue to do it as soon as you can while the kids are young, right? So it can grow.
Right.
Why don't you touch on real quickly, there's another aspect of that funding, and I'll come back and talk about that. But the most basic question, Zach, would be, why would I want to do that? What's the benefit to the 529 plan in the first place if I jam a bunch of money in there? Why would I even do that over just keeping it in a regular investment account?
Yeah, so that strategy that Bob's describing is often referred to as super funding a Roth, and there's that 15,000 limit. But the reason you'd want to throw that all in there in a single year, in some cases, would be, you can do up to 5 years, 30,000. You can super fund the Roth; it would be 5 years worth of that. So you're talking about 150,000. You don't get a tax deduction for that when it goes in. But it's going to grow tax deferred, and then ultimately, if it's used for college tuition and expenses, then it's going to come out tax free. But when it goes in, most of the time, the way that it's invested is determined by how close the child is to actually needing that money for college. So if you put it in right at the get-go when they're born, then they're going to have the most years of being growth oriented in their investment allocation. So I know that that's one major reason to support putting the money in there. Was there anything else that?
No, that was the main thing, is that the potential for tax-free growth on the money.
Right.
And just to correct something you misspoke on earlier, you said super fund the Roth account. Of course, we're
yeah.
I just wanted to be on the record about that.
Yeah, super fund in the 529.
We could do that with a Roth account. Unfortunately, we can't. No, we are talking about that was the other thing that I was going to make sure is clear, and we have seen examples of this in real families where they had the desire and they had the willingness, whether it was the parents or the grandparents, to put $150,000 into that 1-year-old's account from very early in their life, and so. We're not going to predict returns or anything like that, but let's just say hypothetically over 18 years, maybe 150 grows to be 250 or 300,000. Well, all of a sudden, now you've got an account with enough money in it. If that had happened 18 years ago, and now today they've got that money in the account, there's your cost of a Baylor University 4-year degree. It's all in there, and half of it is been from growth. And if they take that money out for qualified education expenses, then it comes out tax-free. And so that's the real benefit to it.
And that's you mentioned taxes, and so just want to mention here, in Texas we don't have a state income tax, but many states do, and that is important. If you are in a state that has a state income tax, then many times that state will say, hey, if you contribute to our own state's plan, they'll give you a tax deduction, they'll give you tax benefits within that state, so you can save on your state income tax. So that would really be the first thing if you wanted to open a 529 account, is asking if, do we have a state program, and am I going to get any tax benefits for that? And it comes down to the investors or the beneficiary's home state in some cases. So maybe you have a grandchild in a different state. Just always look into those state options there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think they can actually, in the right set of circumstances, they can get a tax credit for the otherwise income taxes in that state. So yeah, you're absolutely right. In states that have income taxes, they need to make sure that they get some expert input on plan selection, because that's where the state can really make a big difference which plan you choose. So let's go back to this idea. I mean, look, I understand not most people aren't going to be able to stroke a check for $150,000 and put it in that account, the day the child is born. That's just reality. Yeah. But that's kind of one end of the extreme of how you could fund it. Now, if you did that, you would be essentially pre-funding 5 years worth of that $30,000 a year per child for 2 donors. And the reason is you would do that is to get the maximum tax deferral, potential tax-free growth. But you could also do maybe $10,000 up front, and then you can add $500 a month or $100 a month or whatever. And that's what most people do. Sometimes we've seen where they'll, as the kids get older, and grandma and grandpa will make contributions every year on their birthday and their Christmas, as part of that. And so they're kind of getting reminded every year that, hey, we're building this account for your education. This is an important value in the family, that you go and get the best education you're capable of getting. So there's that side of it. But one other thing that I want, that's really kind of cool about these plans is a lot of times we're asked that, well, what happens if my child gets a scholarship, a full ride? Or what if they end up not going to college or whatever? Well, there's a couple of responses to that. One is starting in January of 2018, the tax law made it a lot more, general or liberal in what you could use the money for and still have it considered to be a tax-free withdrawal. And so, as we said earlier, you could use that money now for not just college, but you can use it for pre-K through 12th grade at private schools, parochial schools, that kind of thing. That's one part of the answer. But the other thing that's really always fascinated me about these plans, Zach, is how flexible they are on changing the beneficiary. And you can change the beneficiary on an account up to twice a year, and you can change it to what they call a qualifying family member. And I thought I would kind of just go through a list here of who that would be. It could be a spouse. It could be a son, daughter, a stepchild, a foster child, adopted child, or a descendant. It could be a son-in-law, a daughter-in-law. These are all qualified family members. A brother-in-law, a sister-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, father or mother or ancestor of either, stepmother, stepfather, aunt, uncle, or their spouse, niece, nephew, or spouses, first cousin, or their spouses. In other words, if they've got any kind of familial connection to you, basically they're eligible. Now think about this. If you had a patriarch somewhere in the family that said, education has been a strong value of our family, and I want to set up something that is there that is going to help future generations, anybody in the family who needs some financial help, you could essentially do that with one of these accounts. They're not really designed for that, but the law has enough flexibility with the changing of beneficiaries to where you could say, look, I've got 3 kids. In my family, for example, the oldest is 12 years older than the youngest. So they each hit college at different times. I could have had a single account for the oldest, and then whatever was left in there when he was done, I could have just changed the beneficiary now to the next in line. And then it happened to be a she. When she was done, I can change it to the next in line. And when he's done, if there's still money in there, guess what? Now I could start using it to name grandchildren as the next beneficiary. So this thing can just go on and on through generations. And all the time that the money's in there, what's happening to the balance? It's growing.
It's just
Hopefully.
growing, tax deferred. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of you listening might be saying, okay, well, I'm a grandfather or grandmother, or might be soon. Let's put a bunch of money in there. How do I make sure that this happens and go to that? And for a 529 account, each account is going to have a beneficiary who is the one that is named as the person to receive the money for their college. And then there's a custodian, and the custodian could be the grandfather or grandparent that opens the account, or the parent that opens the account. And just like a beneficiary can be changed to a child that's in need, the custodian can also be changed on the account. So if you're worried, hey, well, what if I'm not around when it passes down? Well, you could, as the custodian, you can change it and name your spouse, or even maybe it's for your grandchild, but you name one of your children or their parent. So all of that allows it to exist for longer than the original person who opened the account.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say, after saying all of this, Zach, I would say that the thing that we have against the 529 plans is that they are pretty much designed for education. And so the problem that presents as planners for us when we're looking at people's overall plan is that usually people don't have more money than they know what to do with, right? Usually we have to prioritize where we're going to save and what we're saving for. And of course, we love our kids and we want to educate them, but we also don't ever want to run out of money ourselves and be a burden to our kids financially. And so the last idea we're going to talk about today is one of our strategies that a lot of times people have not considered for college funding. Why don't you kind of speak to, let's say somebody, they think, I don't really have enough money to fund the level I want to on my college. Plus, man, I really want to take advantage of funding for retirement. Is there some way I can do both with one strategy? Talk about Roth plans for a second and how that might look.
Yeah. So in states where there's not a state income tax, then someone may say, hey, if I want to, I don't get a tax deduction for putting in a 529. What if I open a Roth account? I can put money into that. And I'm still not getting the tax deduction, but Roth accounts like 529s are also tax. There's no tax as it grows. So it's tax. Once it goes in there, it's basically tax free.
After
when the money comes out, it's tax free.
Yeah, the account has to be open for 5 years, and then after that, it withdrawals and generally be tax free.
Right, but one of the nice things about Roth IRA accounts is if you have one, any withdrawals from that account that are used for higher education expenses are those can come out at pretty much any time frame, as long as it meets that minimum account requirement. But you can essentially use a Roth account as an alternative to a 529. There are lower contribution limits. I would say that's probably the number one con of using that. But like you said, most people, they may be over 50 and they would have a $7,000 a year Roth contribution limit, and that typically will cover what a lot of people want to contribute or save for a grandchild, college savings or something like that.
Well, in a younger family, let's say it's a 30 or a 35-year-old couple who've got young children, if they were able to, if it made sense for them to start directing money they might have otherwise put into a 529 plan, instead they use that to maximum fund their Roth accounts. If they're each able to fund it, they might be putting in, $12,000 to $15,000 a year, roughly, whatever the limits happen to be in their circumstances. And now all of a sudden, this money is building up, not over here in a 529 plan, but it's building up in a couple of Roth accounts. And then when their kids get ready to go to college, why is that potentially a better situation, in our opinion, than it would have been had they socked all that money away in a 529 plan?
Well, sometimes if there's a reason where that money is not needed for college in some cases, or it's not desired to use it for college, the Roth account has virtually no restrictions on what the money can be used for when it's withdrawn. So there's not going to be a penalty if somebody has money in the Roth and they're saving and they get to the point where, hey, I don't have money for my own benefit and my own needs, but they wouldn't be in the position of having money in the 529 and having to take from that, pay a penalty because it wasn't used for college. It could be used for basically anything.
Yeah, that's the big thing. And normally 529 plans are limited to tax-free withdrawals after the account's been open for 5 years and when the owner of the account reaches age 59 and a half. But one of the exceptions they have for making pre-59 and a half withdrawals are in this area of college expenses. So it's kind of a way to get a lot of the benefits that you get out of a 529 plan. But like you said, so often people, this is the thing that you see from experience over the years, Zach, and also through living through it myself. So often what happens when you're 30 and you're looking at those expenses, you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to pay for that? But then when your kids get ready to go to school, a lot of times your professional earning capacity is starting to peak. And and you find a lot of ways to pay for a lot of these expenses out of cash flow is what I've often seen. And maybe the child gets scholarships, and now instead of it being $60,000 a year at Baylor, it's $40,000. Still a big number, but still it's a lot less. So you may not need nearly as much over here in the savings account. So all of a sudden you're looking at that and you're saying, well, gee, I got this big fat Roth account. It took a lot of years to get this big tax-free retirement account. I'd really like to keep that there. I think I'm going to find creative ways to pay for this some other way so I can keep that money in there. On the other hand, maybe you don't have those circumstances and you still want that child to go to college. And so now you've got that money where you can pull it out. So it's just a lot more flexible for using those dollars. And as we think of it as planners, we like people to have options. We don't like them to be boxed up. So it's not that we're hating on 529 plans. We're not. We're just trying to educate folks on kind of the differences in these different strategies. Zach, we got a couple of more minutes here. I want to make sure before we wrap up that we touch on one nice feature in the tax law about, let's say grandma and grandpa are watching this and they're thinking, well, my kids are, the grandkids are already too old. I don't have time to really do anything in a Roth plan or in a, what else could I do? Speak real quickly about the tax benefit if they give towards that college in a specific way where they pay the institution directly.
Well, there's you may be referring to like if they have an RMD or.
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about if, let's say that they pay the institution directly for tuition, for example, and they would normally be concerned. I mean, that tuition might be $40,000 of that private school. Maybe grandma and grandpa are in a position to do that. They think, well, that's more than the $15,000 a year, so I can't do that. Well, that's not true.
Yeah. There's an exception to gifting someone money over. Normally, you would be limited on the amount, but there's an exception if you're gifting that money to them specifically for the use of college expenses. And they used to not be so strict on it. And so you could kind of give the person maybe the money and then they could use it on college expenses. But nowadays, if you wanted to do that, say you wanted to pay that $30,000 bill, you can send the money directly to the higher education institution and it just basically bypass the student. Yeah. And then you avoid that limitation. So it's a really neat tool to be able to gift somebody. Maybe you find yourself, you're a little older and you realize, hey, I have more resources than I need financially. And so that at this point, maybe your grandchild is 18 now or 20 and they need some help. And so that is an option that you'd have. It may not be, there may not be the time component to utilizing one of those other accounts we talked about earlier, but you could help out that way.
Yeah. One other last thing I'll say is we see a lot of times in the estate planning work that people do, the trust, whether it's in their living trust that the attorney will set up for them or in the trusts that are created in their wills, a lot of times they will be very specific in there about funds that were left. Of course, this all happens typically after you've relocated, after you're deceased. But those can be trusts that can also provide resources after you're gone to provide for education for your kids and grandkids and great grandkids. So we're out of time for today, Zach. Hopefully there was some helpful nuggets on here. As always, guys, if you have questions about your specifics, or if you know somebody who needs to hear about this kind of stuff, just shoot us an email, call the office. We'll be happy to help you or anybody that you know. Zach, next week, I know you're going to be talking about a topic that comes up pretty often around our office on with a lot of times people already they're working with somebody and they want to know, what do you think about how my account is structured? And you're going to get into kind of talking about what do we look for in a situation like that, right?
Right. It just an account that we're not, and it can be, if we've been working with you for a while, sometimes people say, hey, I have an account that I forgot about. Hopefully that's not you, but whether you're somebody that we're already working with and you have an account that you found or has been out there or you inherited, or if you're someone that is not working with us and you're already have an account with somebody else, we're happy to take a look and just see, hey, is there anything here that really stands out that we would be concerned about?
I would say the most common way it comes up these days is that people as their parents are aging and they're increasingly getting involved in the lives of their parents, and they're seeing things maybe on the statements that don't look right, and they're like, I'm not sure, they've worked with this person for a long time, but how do you get an educated second opinion on that? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about next week. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Everybody, we appreciate you being with us today. I hope you find these helpful, and we do record them, and they end up on our website. And so if something on here strikes your attention and want to share it with somebody, the videos will be up there probably in about a week. We're going to wrap it up now. Hope you guys are safe and enjoying your life, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for being with us. See you later, Zach.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.